Vice President J.D. Vance just exposed the fundamental problem with negotiating with Iran. The real leader won't even show up. While American diplomats are in Oman trying to negotiate, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, the only person in Iran with actual power, refuses to participate. Vance said, quote, "It's bizarre that we can't just talk to the actual leadership of the country. It really makes diplomacy very, very difficult." Meanwhile, inside Iran, citizens are openly calling for Khamenei's death. Iranian generals are threatening to cut off Trump's hand, and the regime is preparing for war while pretending to negotiate. Stay with me because this Iran situation is about to explode. What's up, everyone? Marcus Reed here with Senate Decoded, where I break down international crises that could drag America into war. Real quick, if you want coverage of escalating tensions with Iran, the diplomatic games being played while both sides prepare for conflict, and analysis the mainstream media won't give you, hit that subscribe button right now. This Iran crisis could explode into full-scale war at any moment. Don't miss it. All right, here's what's happening. The United States and Iran started indirect talks in Oman on Friday. Trump sent his Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff and son-in-law Jared Kushner to negotiate, but there's a fundamental problem that J.D. Vance just called out. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, the 86-year-old dictator who has all the power in Iran, won't participate in negotiations. American diplomats are negotiating with people who can't make decisions. Only Khamenei can, and he refuses to talk to Americans. I'm breaking down who Khamenei is and why he has absolute power, what J.D. Vance said about the impossibility of negotiating with Iran, what's happening in the Oman talks, why Iranians inside Iran want Khamenei dead, what Iranian generals are threatening, and whether war is inevitable. Let's get into it. Let's start with who Ayatollah Ali Khamenei actually is, because understanding his absolute power explains why these negotiations are doomed. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is 86 years old. He's been Iran's supreme leader since 1989, that's 37 years. He is the highest political and religious authority in Iran. He has ultimate control over the military, all branches, intelligence services, Revolutionary Guard, IRGC, judiciary, media, foreign policy, nuclear program, everything how Iran's government works. Iran has a president, currently Masoud Pezeshkian. They have a parliament, they have elections, but none of that matters. The supreme leader is above all of them. He can veto any law, overrule any decision, remove any official, declare war, make peace control who runs for office. Iran's president is basically a middle manager. The supreme leader is the CEO, chairman of the board, and majority shareholder combined. Why Khamenei has this power? Iran is an Islamic theocracy. The supreme leader is considered God's representative on earth, the guardian of the Islamic Revolution, infallible in matters of religion and state. Sina Azodi from George Washington University told Fox News, he is very powerful because he is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and appoints the heads of the IRGC, the Artesh, conventional military, the judiciary, and other important institutions. So Khamenei personally chooses every general, every judge, every intelligence chief, every major government official. They all serve at his pleasure. They can all be fired by him at any time. Khamenei's ideology. Khamenei is a hardline anti-American, anti-Israel revolutionary who believes America is the great Satan. Israel must be destroyed. Islam must dominate the world. The Islamic Revolution must be exported globally. Iran is in an existential struggle with the West. He leads death to America chants. He calls for Israel's elimination. He funds Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and other terror groups. This isn't some moderate we can reason with. This is a true believer who has spent 37 years in power, consolidating control, and preparing for confrontation. Why he won't negotiate directly. According to experts, Khamenei refuses to meet with Western leaders for several reasons. Reason 1, protocol and hierarchy. Azodi explained Iranians are very adamant about diplomatic protocols, that since other countries don't have the equivalent rank, he does not participate in any negotiations because his equal rank does not exist. Translation, Khamenei sees himself as God's representative. No Western leader is his equal. Meeting with them would diminish his status. Even when foreign heads of state visit him, there is only the Iranian flag, and foreign flags are not allowed. That's how extreme it is. Reason 2, religious image. An exiled Iranian journalist, Mehdi Ghadimi, told Fox News, the leader is perceived as God's representative, while leaders of enemy states are viewed as representatives of Satan, which is why he never meets with them. If dialogue or compromise were to take place, his sacred image would collapse in the eyes of his supporters. So Khamenei can't be seen negotiating with Satan, America, or his followers would lose faith. Reason 3, legacy and confrontation. Sources told Fox News that Khamenei sees the confrontation with Washington as defining his historical role and wants to be remembered as the man who stood up to American imperialism. At 86 years old, he's thinking about his legacy, and compromise with America doesn't fit the narrative. Reason 4. Strategic deception. Behnam Ben Taleblu from Foundation for Defense of Democracies explained, the Iranian strategy is to raise the cost of war in the thinking of the adversary. Iran signals willingness to talk while simultaneously preparing for confrontation. The negotiations are theater. The real strategy is building nuclear weapons, developing missiles, and preparing proxies for war. The protocol problem. When foreign leaders visit Khamenei, the protocol is extreme. Only Iranian flag displayed. Visitor must show deference. No equals. Khamenei sits above photos, position him as superior. This isn't normal diplomacy. This is a theocratic dictator demanding submission. Why this matters for negotiations. If Khamenei won't participate and he has all the power, then negotiations are pointless. American diplomats can talk to Iranian foreign minister or president all they want, but those people can't make binding decisions. Everything has to go back to Khamenei, and if he says no, it's no. So we're negotiating with people who are essentially messengers, not decision makers. Now let's talk about what Vice President J.D. Vance said, because he just exposed the absurdity of the entire process. Vance's comments. On Megyn Kelly's podcast earlier this week, Vance said, "It's a very weird country to conduct diplomacy with when you can't even talk to the person who's in charge of the country. That makes all of this much more complicated." He continued, "It is bizarre that we can't just talk to the actual leadership of the country. It really makes diplomacy very, very difficult." Why this is significant. Vance is publicly acknowledging what diplomats usually won't say. These negotiations are fundamentally flawed. Imagine trying to negotiate a business deal, but you can only talk to the assistant, never the CEO. And the assistant has to run everything back to the CEO, who you're not allowed to meet. That's what we're doing with Iran. The historical context. Cool? This isn't new. America has dealt with this problem for 45 years since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. During the Iran nuclear negotiations under Obama, which led to the 2015 JCPOA deal, American diplomats never met with Khamenei. They negotiated with Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, but every detail had to be approved by Khamenei. And what happened? Khamenei ultimately undermined the deal from within, continuing nuclear research in violation of the agreement. Why other countries don't have this problem? When America negotiates with China, we talk to Xi Jinping, who has the power to decide Russia. We talk to Putin, who has the power to decide North Korea. We talk to Kim Jong-un, who has the power to decide. But with Iran, we talk to middlemen who have to ask permission. The proxy negotiation system. Here's how it works. American diplomats meet with Iranian diplomats. Iranian diplomats report back to Khamenei. Khamenei gives instructions. Iranian diplomats return with Khamenei's position. Americans respond, repeat. This takes months. And at any point, Khamenei can just say no and the entire thing collapses. The moderate deception. Gadimi, the exiled journalist, explained, groups labeled as moderate, reformist, or pro-Western are created so that the West can negotiate with them. No one within the structure of the Islamic Republic thinks about anything other than defeating the Western world and establishing Islamic dominance globally. The diplomats presented to Western politicians as moderates are tasked with using diplomacy to buy time for Khamenei. Translation, Iran creates fake moderates to string us along while they build nukes. Vance's implied solution. Vance didn't explicitly say what should be done differently, but the implication is clear. If we can't talk to the real leader and diplomacy is impossible, then what are we doing? Option 1, accept that diplomacy won't work and prepare for military action. Option 2, use back channels to get messages directly to Khamenei, which we've tried. Option 3, wait for Khamenei to die and hope his successor is more reasonable. The Trump administration's dilemma, Trump wants a deal. He says so constantly. He thinks he's the master negotiator. But even Trump can't negotiate with someone who won't sit at the table, so Trump sent Kushner and Witkoff to Oman to try indirect talks through Omani intermediaries, but it's the same problem. Ultimately, Khamenei decides, why this matters. Vance's comments signal that the Trump administration is getting frustrated with this process. If diplomacy is very, very difficult and bizarre, how long before they give up and choose military options? Retired General Jack Keane told Fox News that the U.S. and Israel should take down the Iranian regime through military strikes. Is that where we're headed? Now let's talk about what's actually happening in Oman right now, because these talks are taking place as we speak. The setup. On Friday, February 6, 2026, indirect talks began between the U.S. and Iran in Muscat, the capital of Oman. Oman is serving as the intermediary, literally sitting between American and Iranian negotiators in separate rooms and shuttling messages back and forth. The American team, Steve Witkoff, Trump's special representative for the Middle East, Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and longtime Middle East negotiator, other State Department officials. The Iranian team, Iranian Foreign Ministry officials, representatives from the Supreme National Security Council, possibly IRGC-linked advisors. The Omani role. Oman has historically been a neutral broker between the U.S. and Iran. Why Oman? Oman has good relations with both countries. Geographic proximity to Iran, trusted by both sides. Hosted previous secret negotiations, including preliminary talks that led to the 2015 nuclear deal, Omani Foreign Minister Saeed Badr Hamad al-Busaidi is personally overseeing the process. What's being discussed? Based on reports, the agenda includes Iran's nuclear program enrichment levels. Iran is now enriching to 60%, close to weapons-grade 90%. Centrifuge numbers, IAEA inspections, timelines, sanctions relief. Iran wants all Trump-era sanctions lifted, access to frozen assets, hundreds of billions, oil export permissions, banking access, regional issues, Iran's support for Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq, Syria, threats to Israel, Red Sea shipping disruptions, missile program, Iran's ballistic missile development, technology proliferation, range restrictions, prisoner exchanges, Americans held in Iran, Iranians held in U.S. The U.S. position, according to sources, America is demanding Iran must stop enriching uranium beyond 5% power plant level. Iran must allow full IAEA inspections. Iran must stop attacking U.S. forces through proxies. Iran must stop threatening Israel. Iran must release American prisoners in exchange. Gradual sanctions relief. Access to some frozen funds. Potential diplomatic normalization. The Iranian position, Iran is demanding all sanctions lifted immediately. Access to all frozen assets. U.S. must leave Middle East, close bases. U.S. must stop supporting Israel. Iran can continue peaceful nuclear program. In exchange, maybe some inspections, maybe some restrictions on enrichment, but no guarantees why these positions are irreconcilable. The gap is enormous. America, stop being a threat, then we'll ease sanctions gradually. Iran, lift all sanctions first, then we'll talk about maybe cooperating. Neither side is offering what the other demands. The buying time strategy. Remember what the exiled journalist said, Iran uses negotiations to buy time. While talks drag on for weeks or months, Iran continues enriching uranium, Iran continues building centrifuges, Iran continues developing missiles, Iran continues funding proxies. Every day of negotiation is a day closer to nuclear weapons. Previous failed negotiations. This has happened before. 2015, JCPOA, Obama. Years of negotiations, deal signed, Iran violated it within months. Trump withdrew in 2018, 2021, 2022. Biden talks, attempted to revive JCPOA, Iran made impossible demands, talks collapsed. Now 2026, Trump talks, different administration, same problem. Iran still making impossible demands, likely to fail again. The military backdrop, these talks aren't happening in a vacuum. U.S. military deployments, carrier strike groups in the region, B-52 bombers deployed, thousands of additional troops, munitions, stockpiled Iranian military preparations, IRGC on high alert, proxy forces activated, missile batteries positioned, underground facilities secured. Both sides are negotiating while preparing for war. The Israeli factor. Israel is not at these talks, but Israel is the wild card. Israeli Prime Minister has said Israel will not allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. If talks fail, Israel might strike Iran unilaterally, dragging the U.S. into war, whether we want it or not. My assessment of these talks. These negotiations will fail for the same reasons previous negotiations failed. Khamenei won't compromise. His legacy depends on confrontation. Positions are irreconcilable. Neither side will give what the other demands. Iran is buying time. Every day they get closer to nukes, domestic pressure. Khamenei faces protests at home and can't look weak, regional escalation. Iran's proxies keep attacking, undermining talks. Timeline. I give these talks maybe 2 to 4 weeks before they collapse or are overtaken by events. Israeli strike, major attack, etc. Now let's talk about what's happening inside Iran, because while Khamenei acts tough externally, his own people are calling for his death. The internal unrest. A journalist reporting from inside Iran told Fox News something shocking. What people want more than anything else is for Khamenei to die. I hear it every day, everywhere I go. Why doesn't he die? The journalist continued, you just opened the Twitter of Iranians. The tweet is, why don't you die? And everybody knows who we are talking about. So a nation is waiting for him to die. Let that sink in. Iranians are so desperate, they're publicly hoping their 86-year-old dictator dies. The protests. Iran has faced massive protests repeatedly. June 2025, protests triggered by economic collapse, currency devaluation, inflation over 40%, youth unemployment over 30%. These protests were huge. Cities across Iran saw demonstrations. The regime responded with brutal crackdowns. Thousands arrested, hundreds killed. Internet blackouts January 2026. Protests, more recent protests over currency collapse. Photos show cars burning in Tehran streets, thick smoke over the city, riot police everywhere. Complete chaos. What sparked this anger? Iranians are suffering. Economic collapse, currency worthless, food expensive, poverty rampant, corruption, IRGC, and regime insiders steal billions while people starve. Oppression, women beaten for not wearing hijab properly, youth arrested for dancing, internet censored, no future. Young people see no hope, no opportunities, no freedom. Khamenei's response. Khamenei called the protests an American coup attempt. He blamed the US, Israel, and Western powers for Iran's problems. He refuses to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, his 37 years of disastrous rule might be the problem. Why people want him dead? It's not just policy disagreements. Iranians see Khamenei as the obstacle to change, the source of all suffering, too old and stubborn to reform, willing to destroy Iran to preserve his power. The journalist said, many Iranians no longer believe political reform is possible and instead see generational change as the only turning point. Translation, reform is impossible. He has to die for anything to change. The succession question, Khamenei is 86. He will die relatively soon, maybe 5 years, maybe tomorrow. Who replaces him? Option 1, his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, widely hated, seen as unqualified. Option 2, a hardline IRGC general, would be even worse. Option 3, a reformist cleric, incredibly unlikely. Most likely, another hardliner who continues Khamenei's policies. The Revolutionary Guard's role, the IRGC, Revolutionary Guard, is the regime's enforcer. They run the economy, control 40% of GDP, control the military, run intelligence services, suppress protests, get rich from corruption. The IRGC will choose Khamenei's successor, and they'll choose someone who protects their power and wealth. So even if Khamenei dies, Iran might not change. The regime's weakness. Despite appearing strong, the regime is actually weak. Signs of weakness, constant protests, economic collapse, brain drain, educated people fleeing. International isolation, internal power struggles. Behnam Ben Taleblu told Fox News, regimes that are afraid and lethal and weak can still be dangerous. That's the most concerning part. A weak regime with nuclear weapons is incredibly dangerous. My analysis, Iran is a powder keg. The regime knows it's hanging on by a thread. That's why they crack down so brutally. But you can't suppress a population forever. Eventually, something breaks. The question is, does the regime fall before or after they get nuclear weapons? If before, we avoid nuclear Iran. If after, we have a collapsed state with loose nukes. That's a nightmare scenario. Now, let's talk about Iran's military threats and preparations for war, because while they negotiate, they're also preparing to fight. Iranian generals' threats. Iranian Revolutionary Guard generals have been making increasingly violent threats. Your document mentions top Iranian general threatens to cut off Trump's hand over potential military strikes. That's not diplomatic language. That's a death threat against the President of the United States. Other recent threats from Iranian officials. U.S. bases in the region will be destroyed. Tel Aviv will be leveled. American forces will drown in blood. We will retaliate against any aggression. Iran's military capabilities. Let's be realistic about what Iran can actually do. Strengths, ballistic missiles, thousands of them, some accurate. Proxy forces, Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, Iraqi militias. Cyber warfare capabilities, drone swarms' ability to close Strait of Hormuz temporarily. Weaknesses, Air Force is ancient, 1970s U.S. equipment. Navy is no match for U.S. economy, can't sustain prolonged war. Military is corrupt and inefficient. Ground force is inferior to U.S. or Israel, Iran's strategy. Iran knows it can't beat the U.S. or Israel in conventional war. So their strategy is asymmetric warfare, use proxies to attack, plausible deniability, missile strikes on U.S. bases. Cyber attacks, terrorism, oil disruption. Raise the cost. Ben Taleblu explained this. Iran wants to make war so costly that America backs down. They think, if we can kill enough Americans, Trump will withdraw like Biden did from Afghanistan. The nuclear trump card. Iran is rushing to build nuclear weapons because it prevents U.S. invasion, see North Korea. It gives them regional dominance. It protects the regime from collapse. How close is Iran to nukes? According to IAEA and Western intelligence, enrichment 60%, weapons grade is 90%. Breakout time could get to 90% in weeks if they decide to weaponization. Building delivery systems, missiles. Timeline could have a functional nuke within 6 to 12 months if unconstrained. That's why these negotiations matter so much. Recent attacks. Iran and its proxies have been attacking. Houthi attacks, Yemen, missiles at commercial ships and Red Sea drones at U.S. warships disrupting global shipping, Iraqi militia attacks, rockets at U.S. bases in Iraq, drone strikes in Syria, killing, wounding American soldiers, Hezbollah threats, Lebanon, threatening to attack Israel, massive rocket arsenal, 150,000 plus rockets, could trigger regional war U.S. military buildup. The U.S. is not just talking, we're deploying multiple carrier strike groups, B-52 strategic bombers, additional troops, munitions, and equipment, positioning for potential strikes. Israel's timeline. Israel has made clear we will not allow Iran to get nukes. Israeli military is preparing for potential strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. If Israel strikes, Iran will retaliate, Hezbollah will attack Israel, U.S. will be dragged and regional war begins. The window is closing. Both sides know this situation can't last forever. Either. Option A, negotiations succeed, unlikely. Option B, Israel strikes Iran's nuclear sites, more likely. Option C, U.S. strikes Iran's nuclear sites, possible. Option D, Iran attacks first to trigger war on their terms, dangerous. My war prediction, I think there's a 60-70% chance of military action, U.S. or Israel striking Iran, within the next 6 to 12 months. Why? Negotiations will fail. They always do. Iran continues racing toward nukes. Israel won't tolerate nuclear Iran. Trump doesn't want to look weak. Iran's regime is desperate and might lash out what war would look like. Phase 1. Airstrikes on nuclear facilities, missile sites, military bases. Phase 2. Iran retaliates with missiles at U.S. bases, Israel, and oil facilities. Phase 3. U.S. destroys Iran's military infrastructure. Phase 4. Either Iran regime collapses or messy insurgency casualties, could be tens of thousands. Oil prices could hit 150 plus barrel, regional chaos. The worst case, Iran gets nukes before we can stop them. Then the Middle East becomes a nuclear powder keg with an unstable theocratic regime having the bomb. That changes everything. All right, let me bring this entire story together. Vice President J.D. Vance exposed the fundamental flaw in negotiating with Iran. The real leader, 86-year-old Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, won't participate in talks. While indirect negotiations happen in Oman between U.S. envoys and Iranian diplomats, Khamenei, who has absolute power, refuses to meet with Western leaders, calling them representatives of Satan. Here are the key takeaways. First, Khamenei has total control over Iran's military, nuclear program, and foreign policy, making negotiations with anyone else essentially pointless since he makes all final decisions. Second, J.D. Vance called Iran a very weird country to conduct diplomacy with because we can't talk to the person actually in charge, making diplomacy very, very difficult. Third, current talks in Oman between Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and Iranian diplomats are likely to fail because U.S. and Iranian positions are fundamentally irreconcilable. Fourth, inside Iran, citizens are openly calling for Khamenei's death on social media, seeing him as the obstacle to reform amid economic collapse and brutal repression. Fifth, Iranian generals are threatening to cut off Trump's hand while the regime prepares for potential war with massive military deployments. Sixth, Iran is racing toward nuclear weapons capability, possibly within 6 to 12 months, while using negotiations to buy time. Seventh, Israel has made clear it will not tolerate nuclear Iran, setting up potential Israeli strikes that could drag the U.S. into regional war. Eighth, there's a 60-70% chance of military action within the next year as diplomacy fails and Iran approaches nuclear breakout. So what do you think? Can diplomacy work when the real leader won't negotiate? Should the U.S. strike Iran's nuclear facilities before it's too late? Will Khamenei's death change Iran or just bring another hardliner? Is war inevitable at this point? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want coverage of escalating international crises that could lead to war, hit that subscribe button. I'm Marcus Reed with Senate Decoded, breaking down the conflicts that could change everything. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.